I'd like to welcome you. Okay,
Okay, I have to order that for you.
okay. I'd like to welcome you all to the program that is brought to you by the North Shore Program Consortium, which consists of 6 local libraries: Bayville, Glen Cove, Gold Coast, Locust Valley, Oyster Bay, and Seacliff, that have come together to bring patrons more of a variety of adult programming and more of in a cost-effective way. We hope that you enjoy the program that the consortium has assembled. Our next program is the Age of Witches Hunts. Please go to your library's website to register. Hold on one second. I'm sure. Today's program is hosted by Seacliff Library. And out of respect to our presenter and other participants, we kindly ask you that you remain muted during the program. If you have any questions or answers, you can unmute yourself at the time if you want to participate. Without any further ado, Evan Weiner with a fantastic program on the forum of a coal miner's game to multi-billion-dollar business.
Well, thank you, Rosa, for inviting me, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Evan Weiner. My background is radio and TV, newspapers. I wrote op-ed pieces for New York Newsday about 20 years ago, and worked with John Madden for about 15 years. And he said, you have all these stories, you ought to put them in the book, which I did, called America's Passion: How a Coal Miner's Game Became the NFL in the 20th Century. And the particular piece that I am going to talk about really are the years 1958 to 1966, which Lamar Hunt, the late Lamar Hunt, who founded the American Football League, the owner of the Dallas Texans / Kansas City Chiefs, called the Jerk. The Jerk in the American Football League jerked football into the 20th century, in the 1960s. Now, if you go back, even the New York Giants, back to the time of the early 1950s, television's becoming the #1 entertainment form in the American household. And television would play a significant role in changing the world of professional football, whether the National Football League's owners liked it or not. These guys were not visionaries. George Halas in Chicago, Art Rooney over in Pittsburgh. They just looked at, hey, we're playing a game Sunday. We'll put the shingle up. People show up. Great. We only have 6 games a year. That's all we have at home. And they could never foresee what happened to football today. In fact, the NFL just yesterday awarded Super Bowls to Santa Clara, California, Inglewood, California, and Atlanta. And allegedly, they bring hundreds of millions of dollars in economic impact to those areas. Back in the 1950s, they were trading sneakers, players. 1953, the NFL would set an attendance record. And by 1954, most of the NFL teams had local TV deals, including the New York Giants and Channel 5 in New York. But another league had its sights set on a war with the NFL. It was called the Canadian Football League. And the CFL signed the 1952 Heisman Trophy winner Billy Vessels, along with Eddie LeBaron and Gene Brito. In 1955, LeBaron, Brito, Norb Hecker, Alex Webster, one-time New York Giants coach, and Tom Dublinsky left the CFL for NFL teams after representatives from the 2 competing leagues failed to work out a no-rating treaties. Now, Frank Tripucka lived over in Montclair, or Bloomington, New Jersey, Bloomingfield, New Jersey, rather. And I used to go to his house a lot just to sit around, talk to him and about those days in the 1950s. And here he is. He's a member of the Chicago Cardinals. And it was a step down going from the University of Notre Dame to play in the NFL, and particularly with the Chicago Cardinals. So Tripucka was talking to me about the NFL in 1953. The CFL gave up on competing with the NFL by 1956, but Frank Tripucka, who was the Saskatchewan Roughriders quarterback, said people should never have dismissed the CFL as just another league somewhere north of the United States border. A lot of people think, even in those days, that the National Football League was the almighty league, but it really wasn't, said Tripucka. The National Football League in those days was haphazard. Chirpuka played in the Canadian Football League with Saskatchewan in Regina, Saskatchewan, and he was paid more money in the CFL than he received in the NFL. Well, before I get to Chirpuka's contract, I want to talk about TV and how TV creates the foundation for what is today's NFL. The Dumont Network presented Saturday Night Football in 1953, first time National Football League games were broadcast from coast to coast, but Dumont already had experience with the NFL. And it's kind of amazing Dumont did this considering that they never had money and they really had no affiliates. But they televised the NFL championship game between the Cleveland Browns and the Los Angeles Rams on December 23rd, 1951. Dumont was a financially struggling network, yet they did pay $75,000, should be about $900,000 today, for the right to televise the game. The NFL, their TV contracts now in the billions upon billions of dollars every year. The NFL was competing with people like Gorgeous George. Wrestling was really popular. Boxing was really popular. Bowling was really popular at that time, and the NFL was just another TV show, along with baseball, some hockey, some basketball, and the Ed Sullivan Show, just all thrown together, and I Love Lucy and the Milton Berle Show. In the early years of television, baseball, boxing, championship bowling, wrestling were extremely popular. Gorgeous George was wrestling's biggest star, gaining media attention for his outrageous character, which was described as flamboyant and charismatic. He was a major national celebrity at his peak and a pioneer of early entertainment in television. The NFL had a chance to get on TV. Television executives saw this cheap program. After all, professional wrestling was on all four American TV networks, CBS, NBC, Dumont, and ABC, and wrestling had a following. TV had sports programming, but football was not fully represented. The NFL commissioner, Burt Bell, embraced television, but suggested to team owners they should not show home games because it could depress local attendance. And college football wanted absolutely no part of television. Well, there's Dumont and a football player catching a ball. Dumont and ABC, Paramount ABC, were both weak networks. Yet they had Sunday regional coverage. Dumont offered regional coverage of the New York Giants on WABD, which became WNEW and now WNYW, Channel 5. In Pittsburgh, WD-TV, now KDKA-TV, did Steelers games, and in Washington, Channel 5, WWTG, and that's still the same call letters today, Washington Redskins. ABC offered Chicago Bears and Chicago Cardinals games nationally before relegating them to the mostly Midwest markets, while offering the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers for Western markets, and the Redskins for Eastern and Southern markets. In fact, everything south of Washington, D.C., all the way out to New Mexico. That was the Washington TV market. Dumont replaced Washington with the Philadelphia Eagles games in its rotation. The end of Dumont. By 1955, Dumont was in dire straits following a merger attempt with ABC, Paramount Pictures, being vetoed by Dumont shareholders out of antitrust concerns. It sold off WD-TV in Pittsburgh to Westinghouse Broadcasting. Most of the network's original programming was ended by April 55. On September 23rd, 1955, Dumont ceased operations, but it finished off its sports commitments, with productions ending up on other network affiliates. Now, this is when CBS and Madison Avenue begin to fall in love with the New York Giants. During the 1955 season, the NFL had television problems. The New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, and the Pittsburgh Steelers had deals with Dumont. Chicago Bears, Chicago Cardinals, Los Angeles Rams, and San Francisco 49ers had agreements with ABC, the Cleveland Browns and Washington having their own regionalized coverage. The Baltimore Colts and Detroit Lions, they were just in the home markets, and Green Bay had no local television coverage. Even if they did, they wouldn't have any money because the market was worthless. Green Bay is a problem. And the NFL owners are beginning to realize, hey, there's some money in TV, but Green Bay is a problem and they don't have a new stadium. And maybe it's time to get rid of Green Bay, move them to Milwaukee maybe, and have a bigger TV market and bring more money in. Well, Green Bay is a problem. The NFL owners told the Green Bay Packers board of directors get a new stadium or move the franchise to Milwaukee, which opened the new stadium in 1953. The Packers franchise in a high school stadium was no longer acceptable. The Packers franchise was playing between 2 and 4 games a year at the new Milwaukee Stadium anyway, so it made sense to get them out of Green Bay, even though the NFL was going to give up a good chunk of its history because Green Bay was an original member, and give up that small town feeling, but they were looking for money. But a new stadium would be built in Green Bay, and that's a picture of the stadium being built. The city needed to build a new stadium or lose the Packers. That's according to the Green Bay Press-Gazette editorial from March 14th, 1956. Now, let me just backtrack just a little bit and explain why municipalities are paying for franchises or stadiums for franchises. In Milwaukee in 1950, the Milwaukee City Council voted to build a baseball stadium with the hopes of finding a team. And eventually they did get Lou Perini to move his Boston Braves to Milwaukee in that stadium that Green Bay was using. And then in 1955, Minneapolis-St. Paul came together. They wanted a big league baseball team and a National Football League team, and they put up money to build a stadium. So this is the beginning of communities putting up money for stadiums. And in the newspaper, it said, do Green Bay residents value the Packers enough to add 22.5 cents per 1,000 assessed valuation to their tax bills for the next 20 years? When all the votes are counted, April 3rd, the answer to this question will write the result of the bonding referendum. While it would be unfair to discard the strictly city needs for a new stadium, it has been made plain that the continuing of professional football in Green Bay depends upon a plan with greater seating potential and more salable seats. All taxpayers can find occupational, recreational, or civic reasons for standing to gain in varying degrees from Green Bay being a big league sports city. Green Bay had less people at that time than, say, Elmira, New York. The April 3rd, 1956 bonding referendum did pass, approving $960,000, about $11.6 million today, to build a new Packers stadium. Green Bay will continue to host at least 3 and as many as 4 home games a year, with Milwaukee getting at least 2 Packers home games a year as well. Well, the New York Giants won the championship in 1956. And this is the perfect storm. A great football team in New York, championship football team, biggest market in the country, television, CBS TV, also NBC and kind of ABC in those days, but more importantly, Madison Avenue. And this is where the jerk begins. 1955, the NFL televised the NFL championship game, paying $100,000, $1.1 million today, to the league. Big money was now available for the NFL. TV and Madison Avenue fell in love with the New York Giants in 1956. NFL owners at the time did not realize that professional football was going to change from a game into an entertainment platform. And actually, they didn't even realize this until Sonny Werblin bought the New York Titans out of bankruptcy and became the majority owner of the New York Jets in 1963. Television would make the National Football League more popular and eventually turn it into the #1 spectator sport in the United States. It's Stan Jones. Stan Jones and I knew each other. Stan played with the Chicago Bears in the 1950s. and was a coach in the American Football League in the 1960s. And his story is not unusual, as I'm going to tell you this story. Despite becoming more and more popular in the 1950s, the NFL was a part-time operation. Stan Jones was an offensive lineman with George Halas's Chicago Bears and would report to training camp in July and finish his season in December, and then look for another job. In fact, Halas wasn't even around in the offseason. Stan Jones. We weren't a full-time operation. A lot of people don't realize that. The football teams closed up after the last game of the year and packed everything away. And George Halas wasn't a full-time football man himself. In fact, he ran the Halas and May Sporting Goods Company down in the Loop in Chicago. He had a sporting goods business, and all the other coaches would go on with their lives' work. Said Jones, who's a professional football Hall of Famer, and everybody would get together next July and back to football. In the offseason, you couldn't find the Chicago Bears other than the ticket office, which was in the Halas and May Sporting Goods Company. There wasn't anything at Wrigley Field because that was the Cubs' home park. There wasn't any place where you could say, this is where the Chicago Bears are. That is Sports Illustrated, and that's Chuck Connolly, Charlie Connolly, the New York Giants quarterback, and he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and slowly but surely the NFL is making headway. The 1956 New York Giants football team was not a dominant champion. The team had a great defense, mediocre offense led by Connerly, but the team moves into Yankee Stadium and captures the attention of influential people, CBS television, and on Madison Avenue. You know, the madmen like Draper from the Mad Men show. CBS would partner with the NFL to show games around the country. The Giants, the team, won the championship, and New York responded, the media capital of the world. And the United States noticed. The team had marketable players such as the handsome Frank Gifford, Kyle Rote, Connerly, Sam Huff. I love Sam Huff. I knew Sam Huff rather well. Just loved him. Great guy. And others. And there was Frank Gifford, the handsome Frank Gifford, the guy who was on TV, the guy who was doing commercials for cigarettes and shaving cream. There he is, Frank Gifford. And Gifford said, I always believed that game, the 1956 NFL championship, was the key to the development of the NFL today. People forget what the NFL was like in those days. It was not America's #1 sport. But once we played the game, we became heroes in New York, and the thing just grew from there. The jerk. Well, George Halas was called the jerk, among other things, by a lot of rival players who played the Chicago Bears when he was the coach of the Chicago Bears. In 1956, the Chicago Bears owner, and George Halas, the coach, who ran the league, he basically ran the league, predicted that the league would expand from 12 to 16 teams sometime between 1960 and 1965. The next year, Burt Bell predicted the league would increase its number of teams in 1960, and by 1958, Bell had appointed Halas and the Steelers owner Art Rooney to a committee to explore expansion. Dallas and Houston were identified as cities that could support an NFL team. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Buffalo, and Miami were also in consideration. But the NFL owners, Burt Bell, none of those guys, Tim Mara, none of them had any kind of vision. And they were moving slowly. And the game is picking up steam. It's picking up a lot of steam thanks to the New York Giants being good in the nation's media capital. There is a problem in Chicago. It's called the Chicago Cardinals problem. TV is expanding, and more people are watching on TV, except because teams blacked out games, home games in their markets, there was a problem in Chicago. There were two teams, the Cardinals and the Bears. And since both of them never played head-to-head over a 12-week season, you never saw any games in Chicago. That needed to change. The NFL concluded the Cardinals and Bears could not share the then second biggest market in the country. The two had reached an agreement in the 1930s whereby the Bears would play all of their games north of Madison Avenue and the Cardinals would stay on the south side. The Cardinals owners wanted out of Comiskey Park and looked to move north of Madison Street to play their games. There was a thought that the Bidwell family might be interested in selling the team, and the NFL would allow the franchise to be relocated. And there were people interested in buying the Cardinals franchise, like the guy in the middle there, Lamar Hunt. The guy to Lamar Hunt's right and your left is Bud Adams of Houston. Actually, he was nominated for inclusion in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and that nomination will be voted upon sometime in January of this year. And on the right, Harry Wismer, who owned the New York Titans. Harry was really a key. He was a key component to the early days of the American Football League. But I'm jumping ahead right now. By 1958, pro football began to stabilize economically, and two Texas businessmen, Lamar Hunt of Dallas and Bud Adams of Houston, applied for expansion franchises in those cities. The NFL owners said no. Both had also tried to buy the Chicago Cardinals with the idea of moving them to Texas. Both bids were turned down. Bell and Hellis and Rooney were encouraged by the interest and suggested that the NFL would expand to both Dallas and Houston by 1961. Oh, there is Frank Gifford, the darlings of the New York media. Frank, get lucky. The taste to start with, the taste to stay with, lucky strike. On the field, the Giants, glamour boys of Madison Avenue. And you got to remember at this time, New York had the three baseball teams, which included Willie Mays of the New York Giants, Mickey Mantle and Yogi Berra, and Whitey Ford over with the Yankees, and the Dodgers with Pee Wee and Campy and Jackie Robinson. So there was a lot of competition on Madison Avenue at that point. Giants won in 56, finished the 1958 season in a tie with Cleveland on top of the NFL Eastern Conference. Again, the perfect storm comes. They beat the Browns 10-0 in the playoff game and then faced the Baltimore Colts in the championship contest. The Giants had Gifford, Charlie Connerly, and I got a story about Connerly here, which involves Pat Summerall, who I knew. And Pat, one day I said to Pat, how'd you get involved in this business? And Pat said, it was simple. I was at Yankee Stadium. We were done with practice. The phone was ringing. The phone was next to the shower at Yankee Stadium. He picked up the phone, said, Pat Summerall here. Some guy at WCBS radio. And they said, is Charlie Connolly around? Pat says, no. The guy says, hey, you sound pretty good. Why don't you come down? We're doing auditions for the radio show on WCBS. Why don't you come down? Pat went down, aced the audition, and the rest is history in terms of Pat Summerall being on radio and TV. Kyle Rote, Sam Huff, highly recognizable names. Colts history traced back to the New York Yankees' brief fling in the NFL in 1951. That team went to Dallas, folded, resurrected as the Baltimore Colts in 1953. Johnny Unitas, Raymond Berry, Lenny Moore, Gino Marchetti, who owned Gino's, the fast food restaurant, and Artie Donovan, who was a friend of mine. Fine players, but the New York media convinced the sporting public that the Giants were simply a better football team. Greatest game ever played. Well, that's what the people say. Ask the members of the Baltimore Colts, probably not. Ask members of the New York Giants, probably not. In fact, you ask the guy, and you couldn't do that right now, an old friend of mine, the late Bob Wolf, who did the Don Larson perfect game in the World Series in 1956, and this game, was this the greatest game he ever called? No, it wasn't. It was a mediocre game, but had a lot of drama. The Colts and Giants finished regulation tied at 17. Colts tied it on a Steve Myrer field goal with 7 seconds left. The Colts won it in overtime after Johnny Unitas, led the team downfield, capped by Alan Amici's 1-yard touchdown run, 8:15 to go in overtime. Americans were glued to the game on NBC. In fact, they stayed with the game after the feed was lost. Somebody on the field stepped on the wire and cut the wire, and people lost the game, and then they came back to watch the end. The on-field drama had viewers tied to their TV sets and convinced both TV executives and Lamar Hunt football had arrived. This is Johnny Unitas, and this is his view of the game and what Johnny U told me back in 1999. Now, it's just another ball game. That's all it was. You never think of those things going into them. It just happened to be the one that was a championship game that happened to be in overtime. The first overtime game ever, and it happened to be the one that was watched by more people than any other sporting event in the world at that time. Not true, but Johnny thought it was true. It was not an outstanding football game for us. The reason why people remember it is the overtime and the way we tied it up. It put football over the top and into the prominence it holds. Unitas told me he wanted to make sure that the Colts won fair and square and clean. That's why they went down the field and scored a touchdown instead of kicking a field goal. Halas and Rooney moved ahead with their committee and scheduled the Bears and Steelers to meet in the 1959 preseason game in Houston. Halas had a news conference in February and April in Houston to sell tickets to the game and discuss expansion plans. He thought the league would start expanding in 1960 with Dallas, Houston, Buffalo, and Miami as the most likely expansion cities, and that the NFL would act on adding teams at its annual meeting in January 1960. The NFL timetable was not fast enough for Lamar Hunt, and by July 28, 1959, Bert Bell, the NFL commissioner, told the Congressional Committee of Hunt's plan with Hunt's permission. A few weeks later, Halas announced that his expansion committee would recommend at the January 1960 meeting that the NFL expand into Dallas and Houston for the 1961 season, with the Houston franchise joining the NFL if there was an adequate stadium available. The NFL had hoped to use Rice University's field until a new football field was built in Houston. But Rice University officials turned down the NFL's overture. The league ended its flirtation with Houston at that point, and Minneapolis stepped up its efforts to join the NFL at that time, even though they had an AFL franchise. And that is the picture of the original owners of the American Football League. Lamar Hunt, the guy holding the football. Harry Wismer is in there, Bud Adams is in there, and the other guys are there as well. Lamar Hunt decided if he couldn't join the NFL, he might as well compete with them, and by 1959, the American Football League was organized with franchises in Dallas, in Houston, in Los Angeles, in Minneapolis, in Denver, and in New York. Eventually, Boston and Buffalo would join the league, but Minneapolis owner Max Winter dropped out when the NFL awarded him an expansion franchise in the Twin Cities in 1961, and eventually his franchise, or the Minneapolis franchise, that spot would be taken up by Oakland. Winter and his group did not deposit a $100,000 performance bond, that would be slightly more than $1 million today, with the AFL in November, even though Winter's partners saw the lease with the Minneapolis Stadium Commission to play at that city's stadium. The group was denied until the commissioner got the commission got definitive yes or no from the NFL about expansion into Minnesota. And that is Lamar Hunt. The first organizational meeting of the AFL was in mid-August 1959 in Chicago, recalled Hunt. I think there was an opportunity. The sport needed to grow. It had gone through a consolidation period, and we had seen the 1958 great championship game between the Giants and Colts. There was great national interest in the game, and there were a lot of cities, frankly, that were growing. Not all of them had great stadium facilities, but it was beginning to happen. The public was beginning to perceive that this game had a national appeal. Hunt's first move after he decided to go ahead with the American Football League was to meet with Adams in Houston. Hunt felt a Dallas-Houston rivalry would be important for the new league. Hunt also noticed that NFL attendance had grown from nearly 2 million in 1950 to nearly 3 million or more in 1958. The NFL had signed a TV deal with CBS in 1956, and further pushed pro football into the nation's consciousness. Ralph Wilson takes a franchise in Buffalo. Couldn't get a franchise in Miami. That's where he wanted to go. But the old All-American Football Conference, Miami Seahawks ownership ran out on the Orange Bowl and didn't pay the rent. So the Orange Bowl was in no hurry to take an American Football League team. So Wilson ended up in Buffalo. The others came really from names that were interested in getting the Chicago Cardinals to move to their city. Harry Wismer was not in that group. He was a stockholder, interestingly, in two NFL teams, Detroit and Washington. And I don't know how that came about, but he came in a little later with the New York Titans. Ralph Wilson in Buffalo also came in October, and his franchise became the 7th. And then the Boston Patriots with Bill Sullivan became the 8th franchise. And we went through another consolidation, and we lost one team and then added the Oakland Raiders as the 8th team. Wilson thought about placing a team in Miami, but Orange Bowl officials said no. We were stiffed in 1946. We don't want you. The NFL was not the gold standard. That is Buddy Dial. Buddy Dial played with the New York Giants and then the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he had an interesting story. Despite growing prosperity, not all of the NFL teams operated in a first-class manner. Pittsburgh, long a league doormat, was considered the last chance or the last chance stop on the NFL circuit. If the Steelers cut a player, it meant it was the end of the line. Buddy Dial had been cut by the Giants during the 1959 training camp portion of the season and tried out for the Steelers. Dial had been an All-American in college, but was drafted by a star-studded team with no room for him or Don Maynard. When Dial got to Pittsburgh, he was in for a shock. I was with the Giants, and we were in Los Angeles. The Giants were going to open the season with the Rams on the West Coast. This was on a Friday. Every Friday at breakfast time, they would make their final cuts. Lee Grosscup, the All-American quarterback from Utah, and myself were going to be the last two cut. This Friday morning breakfast, Jim Lee Howell, the head coach, came around and tapped us on the shoulder and said, come by his room and bring your playbook. We both knew we were gone. I'm out in Los Angeles, and I find out from Sam Huff, the great middle linebacker, that I was picked up by the Steelers. Huff's news didn't help Dial's bruised feelings in any way. Pittsburgh was the end of the line for NFL players. Man, I'm not going to Pittsburgh because Bobby Lane is their quarterback and he's drunk all the time. I didn't know. He's the finest quarterback who ever lived and the funniest and most beautiful guy I would ever meet. So I flew all night to Pittsburgh and I walked into Forbes Field. It's the home of the Pittsburgh Pirates and the stadium, and they didn't have a football uniform for me. Here is Buddy Dial, post cereal cards. The Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team had just finished their season the Wednesday before. This is Saturday. Steelers are going to open the season on Sunday against Cleveland. So Bobby Lane said, Dial, get your butt in the huddle. I said, I've been flying all night. And the equipment man just said, Buddy, get your uniform on. I went into the locker room and there wasn't a football suit. There was a Pittsburgh Pirates baseball uniform left over from the season. I put that thing on, trotted out on the field. My first time with the Steelers and Bobby Lane in a dadgummit Pittsburgh Pirates baseball uniform. Chicago problem. In 1959, the Chicago Cardinals franchise played 4 of its home games at Soldier Field, 2 in Minneapolis. The only time Cardinals drew a large crowd for a home game in the 1950s was against the Bears. George Halas asked Bert Bell to come up with a decision on the Cardinals' planned move north of Madison Street. Bell turned down the Cardinals' owner's request. CBS also wanted one of the Chicago teams to move so it could show games in the Chicago market. Bud Adams met with the Cardinals' ownership in an attempt to buy the team, move them to Houston. Adams even staged a preseason game between the Bears and Steelers to convince NFL officials that moving to Houston would be profitable. The NFL had nebulous expansion plans and was forced to deal with the Cardinals' Chicago problem. Alvin Pete Rozelle, to quote How It Goes Sal, Alvin Pete Rozelle. Anyway, 1960 and the changes. Burt Bell died of a heart attack suffered at Franklin Field in Philadelphia during a Steelers-Eagles game on October 11th, 1959. Treasurer Austin Gunsell was named the president in the office of the commissioner on October 14th. On the same day that Lamar Hunt was elected AFL president, that's January 26, 1960, Alvin Ray Pete Rozelle was elected as the NFL commissioner as a compromise candidate on the 33rd ballot. 2 days later, on January 28th, the National Football League awarded the franchise to Clint Murchison to operate the the Texas Rangers franchise in Dallas, Texas Rangers. They couldn't use that name. The Murchison Rangers would become the Dallas Cowboys and go head-to-head with Hunt, the AFL, and the Dallas Texans. Minneapolis was also granted a franchise contingent on selling 25,000 season tickets for the 1961 season. Wayne Valley would become an Oakland owner. Man, his wife was a pistol. His wife was a pistol. Anyway, with Minneapolis joining the AFL, the NFL, the AFL met on January 29th and awarded Oakland the last franchise. The AFL wanted the team in the West to go along with Los Angeles and Denver and felt Oakland would be a promising area. The AFL bypassed Atlanta, and they made a strong case for inclusion. Vancouver, Seattle, Kansas City, Louisville, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Jacksonville, Miami, St. Louis, and Milwaukee. They all made pitches for AFL teams. Even though NFL owners were trying to throw every roadblock they could in Hunt's way to establish the AFL and his Dallas franchise, the owners did not go out of their way to make the Dallas Cowboys very competitive. The Dallas Cowboys actually started life as the Dallas or Texas Rangers a couple months earlier. Clint Murchison pushed to get accepted into the NFL. He wanted to buy into the Washington Redskins and would own that team until a Dallas franchise would be established. But George Preston Marshall was not ready to sell the Redskins. Marshall also had a stake in Dallas as a city. It was part of his vast television network that pumped Redskin games into the Southeast and into Texas. CBS may have had a TV deal with the NFL, but not with Marshall. Marshall wanted to protect his property. This is a great story, and this is how the Dallas Cowboys came to be. Murchison eventually got the franchise for a song. He somehow ended up with the Redskins fight song, Hail to the Redskins. Murchison threatened not to allow the song to be played in Washington, and Marshall relented. Murchison paid about $600,000, or about $6.4 million today, for the Dallas Cowboys franchise that the NFL owners gave him on January 26th to begin play that year. The Cowboys today, that business is worth about $11 billion. The Chicago problem is solved. St. Louis gets pro football Chicago Cardinals, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and the NFL was assured that there would be 25,000 season tickets sold in St. Louis. CBS, which was televising NFL games, needed a solution to the Bears-Cardinals two-market setup. Since the teams never played head-to-head, unless they played one another, the league was blacking out home games, so CBS never showed games in Chicago. On March the 13th, 1960, the Cardinals moved to St. Louis after receiving $500,000, about $5.3 million today, for improvements at Soldier Field, where they were playing. Some of that money came from CBS. In truth, it wasn't just that the NFL allowed the Cardinals to move to St. Louis. The league and George Halas paid the Cardinals and the Bidwell family to move. In the NFL, money talks. The Cardinals owners took their Chicago grandstand from Soldier Field or Comiskey Park with them to St. Louis, even though they didn't need it. But apparently they were given the $500,000 to take some grandstand somewhere. What if Lamar Hunt bought the Cardinals? What if? Well, I asked him one day, and this is what he told me. Probably the game would have taken a different course. Certainly the league would have expanded. I would hate to hazard a guess how many teams it might be, but the AFL jerked the game of pro football forward rapidly into an era where we were all of a sudden, instead of being 12 teams in 1 year, there were 21 teams. Before 1960, you had 2 West Coast cities in the NFL, the rest concentrated in the Northeast. The AFL changed all that. Suddenly, you had pro football in cities that didn't have it before: Dallas, Denver, Houston, Buffalo. That was a remarkable addition, and of course, single other expansion. There was a need for a second football league. The argument could be made, you have to fill a need, but there was a need, a natural opening for it. The AFL was very fortuitous. It had perfect timing. The war starts, and that is the American Football League Commissioner, Joe Faust, Medal of Honor winner. He was a great flyer in World War II. I don't think he won the Medal of Honor. He won another award. But he was a great flyer during World War II, head of the NRA at one point, governor of South Dakota. The AFL decided on November 23rd, 1959, to approve a cooperative television plan whereby the league office negotiates television contracts, or the television contract, and proceeds from that would be equally divided among the member teams. By June 9th, 1960, the AFL had a TV deal with the American Broadcasting Company. By the way, the deal was brokered by a guy by the name of Jay Michaels. Now, you probably don't know his son, Alan, who started his career as an assistant on Let's Make a Deal and then worked his way up to Chuck Barris on The Dating Game. And you probably know who I'm talking about now, Alan Michaels, Al Michaels. But his father was the guy who cut the original TV deal, and nepotism goes a long way in television broadcasting. It was a 5-year deal with the 8 teams sharing $1.785 million, which would be about $18 million today in 1960, and gradual increases over the life of the agreement. That TV deal got the attention of the NFL commissioner, Pete Rozelle, who thought the plan was one his league needed. Harry Wismer, WIP Philadelphia, Mutual Broadcasting System. Harry Wismer's legacy is as a drunk who put the New York Titans franchise into bankruptcy. And when I talked to Lamar Hunt about Wismer's legacy in the AFL, it was like pulling teeth. Yeah, you got his importance, but Lamar really didn't want to talk too much about it. When the American Football League did get underway, newspaper coverage was not necessarily TV. It was particularly helpful. New York Titans owner Harry Wismer, a noted sportscaster of his time, did 2 things. Wismer worked and got the AFL game coverage on the Associated Press and United Press, which would become United Press International, wires. He also helped the league land a TV deal with ABC. The war starts. These guys against the NFL. March 9th, 1960, AFL Commissioner Joe Faust gives a deposition to the United States Department of Justice asking for federal antitrust action against the NFL for placing an expansion team in Dallas after the AFL and for other actions taken by the NFL to put us out of business. On June 17th, the AFL filed a $10 million, about $106 million today, lawsuit against the National Football League. The league charged the NFL with monopoly and conspiracy in areas of expansion, television, and player signings. In 1962, the AFL lost that case. It was a rocky start. The first game is the Denver Bronco Boston Patriot matchup on a Friday night. Why a Friday night? Because the New York Giants, they had a game on Sunday. And New York Giants, New England's team. And they decided not to go head-to-head with the Giants. First game played September 9th, 1960. Despite the news coverage and ABC exposure, the league had trouble spots. Oakland played its games in San Francisco, Kezar Stadium. Denver was a laughingstock. Boston was constantly looking for a stadium, and the New York Titans weren't drawing people to the Polo Grounds. Los Angeles was playing before thousands upon thousands of empty seats, despite having a good football team. Oh, there are the vertical striped socks of the Denver Broncos, which I saw with my own eyes in Frank Tripucca's house. He stole a pair and displayed them. The AFL featured wide open offenses, had a 2-point conversion, and put names on the back of players' jerseys, but didn't have a major league presence. Houston played in a high school stadium. The Boston Patriots played on Friday nights, so the team would not compete with the New York Giants telecast in New England on Sunday afternoons. The Giants, that was New England's football team. Denver wore vertical striped socks. And also, CBS is really pushing the NFL, the violent world of Sam Huff. Columbia Broadcast System, or CBS, did have a relationship with the NFL, but it was not a full-time partnership, though, as teams could negotiate their own TV deals. But CBS did promote the league and decided to focus on one player, New York Giants linebacker named Sam Huff. The Violent World of Sam Huff aired on October 30th, 1960. Huff was the first NFL player ever to be on the cover of Time magazine. He led that defense. The Yankee Stadium crowd used to shout. The Violent World of Sam Huff was a primetime special glorifying football violence and mayhem. Played in Montreal, and that's where I was wired for sound, and we played the Chicago Bears. Said Huff, recalling the show that was narrated by Walter Cronkite in the first year of the CBS national contract in the network's effort to sell the NFL and its violent aspect. This is what Sam told me. I remember one of the wide receivers came across the field. The ball was basically dead. He hit me up along the side of the head and knocked me over. I looked up at him. I said, you never know what, and I looked up at him and I said, you know, you never hit anyone in your life. What are you doing? He said, I just want to get on TV. Cronkite was shilling for the network's newest entertainment investment, football, narrating the violent world of Sam Huff television programming. The AFL survives, and Elvin Pete Rozelle, who taught me a lot about the business of sports in the 1980s, at least NFL, was envious. Rozelle thought the key to NFL survival in the war was television and having the same type of deal the AFL had with ABC. His 14 franchises would share equally in a national TV deal. Rozelle had to convince the Giants ownership, led by Jack Mara, Hallis in Chicago, and the Los Angeles Rams owner, Daniel Reeves, that it was in the best interest of the league to make sure Green Bay and Pittsburgh received the same amount of TV revenue as the Giants, Bears, and Rams. In 1961, Pete Rozelle cut a 2-year, $9.1 million deal, $97 million today, with CBS. The NFL submitted the deal before federal judge Alan K. Grimm in Philadelphia to make certain it was legal. In July, Judge Grimm decided the NFL-CBS deal violated antitrust laws. Grimm had been dealing with the NFL and television matters for about a decade at that point. Also, there's a third baseball league that is starting out roughly at this time, the Continental League. And the Continental League never got off the ground. New York Mets came out of it. Houston Astros came out of it. But the AFL co-opted everything that Branch Rickey had put together for this league and used it in the American Football League, and Pete Rozelle would co-opt everything that Lamar Hunt did, and all came from Branch Rickey. The AFL as a new entity flew under the antitrust law. Lamar Hunt may have gotten the shared TV idea from Branch Rickey, who was putting together the Continental League of Professional Baseball. Rickey was pitching the league to Hunt, who said no because he was busy with the AFL. Rickey wanted Hunt to own the Dallas franchise and explain the league concept, which included shared TV revenues. Major League Baseball had an antitrust exemption and could bundle its 16 teams as one and sell it to a TV network. And there is Judge Alan Grimm of Philadelphia. In 1949, the Los Angeles Rams drew a total of 300,000 to games at the Coliseum. Then in 1950, the team began to telecast Rams home games in the greater Los Angeles area, and the team drew only 145,000 fans. After the season, then NFL Commissioner Bert Bell urged teams to black out home games in an effort to keep people in the stands for home games instead of in front of the television. By 1953, the NFL was in a court defending its blackout policy, an opinion supported by Judge Alan K. Grimm, who upheld the league's blackout policy, believing that it was not a violation of antitrust laws. Brooklyn Congressman Emanuel Seller becomes one of the most important people ever in the history of the NFL and should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a builder. Roselle went to Emanuel Seller, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Antitrust and Monopoly, looking for help. Seller got a bill through Congress. Similar bill was introduced in the Senate by Estes Kefauver, who pushed it through the Senate. New York Congressman Emanuel Seller first entered the House of Representatives in 1923. His impact on professional football came in 1961, when Seller authorized legislation that would give the NFL tremendous clout with growing television networks, the Sports Antitrust Broadcast Act. That year, both the House and Senate passed Seller's legislation. The act was signed into law by President John F. Kennedy, September 30th, 1961. The Seller bill allowed the NFL to market its broadcast rights as a league package evenly, spreading the broadcast revenues among the franchises and guaranteeing each team substantial annual revenues. The NFL achieved parity with the AFL in one area, television. The CBS partnership, Ray Nitschke, he's going to flip all the cards over John Charles Daly after Arlene or Dorothy guesses it's Ray Nitschke. Hey, put NFL players anywhere you can, like on What's My Line? CBS would win the rights to NFL games in 1962 with a $4.65 million bid, about $40 million today. NBC would gain the 1963 AFL Championship game for $926,000, about $9.8 million today, despite the fact that ABC was the AFL regular season TV rights holder. CBS would keep the NFL for the 1964 and 65 seasons, as well as the NFL Championship game by paying $14.1 million per season, about $149 million today, and $3.6 million, about $38 million today for two championship games. The NFL, CBS, and most of America's newspapers and magazines like Sports Illustrated were ignoring the AFL. But the AFL was finding good players from an area that the NFL ignored, black college football conferences. The AFL was putting out a good product and a different game, wide open with high-scoring games using players from black schools. But it was the 1960s, and Jim Crow is a massive problem. That's Walter Beach, still in Cleveland. And he decided to stage a one-man strike in 1961 over Jim Crow. Walter Beach was cut by the AFL's Boston Patriots in 1961, labeled a troublemaker for organizing a protest among the black players against the segregated living conditions during the team's road trip for a preseason game in New Orleans. That would be a 2-day trip, but he was going to have to live on the other side of town, substandard conditions, and he said, aren't I a member of this team? Apparently in New Orleans he wasn't, and he was cut. That is Freddie the Hammer Williamson, and Clement Daniels, and Art Powell, and Jim Otto, and Al Davis. Civil rights activists? Yeah, Al Davis was a civil rights activist. It is Mobile, Alabama. It is August 1963, and 6 African-American members of the Oakland Raiders refused to play in an exhibition game against the New York Jets at Ladd Stadium, which then had segregated seating. Mobile had hosted 3 prior American Football League preseason games, 1960, 61, and 62. Al Davis is the rookie head coach of the Oakland Raiders in 1963. Clem Daniels, Art Powell, Bo Robertson, Fred Williamson, Proverb Jones, and Eugene White said, no, we're not playing. They were backed by AD, Al Davis. And there is Mobile. And this is Ray Schussler Jr., Ladd Stadium manager, and you talk about condescending. 1963, listen to this. We don't want 4 boys from Oakland telling us how to run our stadium. We're going to integrate quietly. We're going ahead as in the past for other exhibition games here. Clement Daniels, I wanted to play in Mobile before an integrated crowd and contribute in some small way to breaking down of these needless prejudices. The game was played in Oakland. The AFL never returned to Mobile. The 1965 Senior Bowl in Mobile was integrated, although organizers reluctantly did so. Well, it's 1964. Civil Rights Act was signed into law by Lyndon Johnson on July 7th, 1964. And the American Football League decides it is going to put its All-Star game in New Orleans. And New Orleans wants a team. Well, that is Cookie Gilchrist. He played with the Buffalo Bills. Why New Orleans? Well, New Orleans leaders said the city was going to welcome the AFL All-Stars, 22 black players, with open arms. Segregation, Jim Crow, hey, that's gone. Something in the past. And the city desperately wanted a professional team. The AFL wanted to expand, and it had New Orleans as a target. In fact, they even thought about 1961. It seemed the perfect business marriage would happen, but it didn't. Equals on the field. If you look at the program from San Diego in 1963 for the second annual AFL All-Star Game, well, you got Henry, Hank Schramm there, the coach of the AFL West. At that point, he would be the Dallas Texans coach. Pop Ivy, the Houston coach. Then you got 8 players. 3 of them are African American. 37% of the players on the program are African American. Equals. The American Football League was the only league at the time to truly embrace the African American athletes as an equal on the field with white players. Irv Cross was a friend of mine, and about 5 years ago, we were talking. He said, "What you talking about?" I said, "I'm going to be doing Super Bowl talks." He said, "Okay, oh, you're going to talk about the quota?" I said, "Of course I'm going to talk about the quota. It's part of the Super Bowl." I said, hold on. Let me think. My rookie year, Philadelphia, 1961. Me, Ted Dean, Tim Brown. There were 4 of us. Clarence Peaks. It made sense. We could room together. 2 rooms, 4 players, room together. It was a quota in the NFL. Most teams had about 4 African American players, except Washington. George Preston Marshall was a racist and didn't have any African American players. In fact, Maury Povich's father, Shirley Povich, who was the Washington Post sports editor, wrote an editorial asking George Preston Marshall, "When are you going to hire black players?" And George Preston Marshall said, "When the Harlem Globetrotters hire a white guy, I'll hire a black player." NFL scouts went to watch players from big-time schools and conferences. AFL looked for players with a different background, players from black schools such as Grambling and Bethune-Cookman and Prairie View and North Carolina, AT&T, Morgan State, Southern University, and A&M College. Ironically, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 destroyed the black college football programs as the best players could attend the big schools. Players will be welcome with open arms in New Orleans. Just like the 6'9", 312-pound Ernie Ladd. Well, maybe not. The players' experience at the New Orleans airport was the first bad sign. Cab after cab passed Clem Daniels, even as white players zoomed off without having to wait. When a black player went to hop in with a white teammate, the cabbie would say, "No can do." The black players were denied access at some restaurants and nightclubs at the French Quarter. And here's this story about Ernie Ladd. Ernie Ladd and Dick Westmoreland and Earl Faison, these are all big guys, are walking down Bourbon Street, and they have a speaker at one of the places is James Brown. So they figure, hey, they're playing Soul Brother #1, his music in this place, which happened to be the Playboy Club, we're going in. Well, there was a guy guarding the door, and he's about 5'8", and he says to Ernie Ladd, "I wouldn't go in there if I were you." And Ernie Ladd looks at him, "Screw you," and rips the door off the hinges. Then the guy takes out a gun, and the players scatter. The players were spit upon, the black players. They were also cursed at, and they couldn't get the cabs. It was a problem, big problem. The late Abner Haynes, who just passed away a couple of weeks ago, who was a friend of mine in Dallas, wanted me to write a book with him, and I didn't have the time to write a book with him, nor am I a biography writer. That is a specialty, and I don't have that ability. But he gave me stories anyway, hoping to convince me to write a biography, and I said, "Abner, find somebody who knows what they're doing, because That's not the kind of writer I am. 40 seconds, putting something together, perfect. But a book? I'm not sure a biography is me. Abner Haynes was telling the story. He's at the airport. He and David Grayson, the cabs are whizzing by him and whizzing by him. Finally, word gets back to Jack Kemp, the Buffalo quarterback who ran for vice president in 1996 with Bob Dole as heading the presidential ticket. And he finds out that the black guys are not there. He calls up Bud Adams, the Houston owner, who calls up the governor of Louisiana, and they send out the black cabs for the black players. Abner was told name, rank, and serial number when you get to New Orleans. Just your name, Abner Haynes, running back, Kansas City Chiefs, American Football League All-Star. So he gets to the Hotel Roosevelt, he checks in with David Grayson, and they go to the elevator, which was an old hand-cranked elevator, and there's an elderly white woman there, and she opens the gate and she sees these two guys and says, "Hey, monkeys, what are you doing here?" The rest of the story is Abner. They had a woman operating the elevator, and she said, "You monkeys come on in and get to the back." Finally, we had 10 or 12 guys in my room. We were talking sensibly. We're going to stay together. This was just another test. We had no leverage. We weren't playing for money, but we were playing for progress. Football players took the lead. Places like Atlanta, New Orleans, Miami, they're death holes. David Grayson couldn't get a drink at the bar. Our white teammates in New Orleans were there for us. And that's me and Jack Kemp in 1979. And he's running for president. And it's Spark Hill, New York. And I'm doing an interview as a 23-year-old with a presidential candidate. Anyway, that's Jack Kemp. And once I gave him that picture, I said, "Why don't you sign it for me?" He looked at me and he said, "What happened to your hair?" I said, "What happened to your wig? It's powder white." There he is in 2003 with my son. Told you, powder white wig. One of the things we, the AFL, needed was the unity of the white and black players for a new league. When the white players, Jack Kemp, Jerry Mays, who was our Kansas City defensive leader, and 4 or 5 other guys, heard about what was happening, their characters showed, and my teammates were looking after me. Ron Mix played in the 1965 All-Star game, which was played in Houston. And in 2014, I gave him a call. I said, "Hey, Ron, the Los Angeles Clippers players are threatening to strike." And this is in the NBA with the owner, Donald Sterling, telling his girlfriend not to bring, or his mistress rather, not to bring black guys to games. I said, "You had something similar to that. Let's talk." And he did. We were aware that New Orleans was hosting the game to demonstrate to the American Football League and the National Football League, New Orleans, could support a football franchise. The last thing we wanted to do was assist them in demonstrating they could support a franchise. A boycott was the only alternative for the players. Dave Dixon was the guy who wanted to own the team in New Orleans and was the guy who was the point man between the American Football League and the city of New Orleans. And he is upset. He told the New York Times the boycotters had unjustly sullied New Orleans' reputation, complaining their militant action would not only damage the city, but would greatly retard efforts by men of goodwill of both races to achieve harmony. The mayor, Victor Shiro, well, he had a little different viewpoint of this. He said the black players should have just rolled with the punches. Hey, you know what? They pull a gun on you, big deal. The governor, John McKeithen, said there are some clubs down on Bourbon Street that won't even let our district attorney, Jim Garrison, in. But Garrison was pushing the JFK conspiracy with Clay Shore and Lee Harvey Oswald and all that at that point. So I kind of understand that. The game was moved to Houston. New Orleans was on the outside looking in. Eventually, New Orleans would become a political pawn. The Super Bowl would rise out of the ashes of the New Orleans boycott. And how we get to today's NFL is a story in itself. AFL NBC signed for $36 million. David Sarnoff was mad at the NFL because, or rather CBS, because CBS gave the National Football League $36 million. He wanted the National Football League, so he did the next best thing. He signed the AFL. Here's the money, boys. Go at it. Sign the best players. On January 29th, 1964, NBC guaranteed the future of the AFL by signing a 5-year, $36 million deal, $383 million today, beginning in 1965. The deal was cut between the new New York Jets owner, David Sonny, as in money, as Cosell would say, Werblin, and NBC founder David Sarnoff. While the growing pains, Baron Hilton moved his LA Chargers to San Diego in 1961. Oakland restructured its ownership and the Denver franchise was sold to a group of investors. 1962, the AFL decided against expanding after listening to presentations by Kansas City, New Orleans, and Atlanta. Oakland's owners kicked the tires about moving to Vancouver, British Columbia, or New Orleans, but stayed in the Bay Area. Lamar Hunt, in a life and death struggle with the Dallas Cowboys ownership, they were also ailing, took a look at Kansas City's proposal and decides to move from Texas to Missouri if the city guaranteed season ticket sales, expanded Municipal Stadium, constructed an office and practice facility for the team. They say yes. Hunt moves the team May 14, 1963. Wismer's Titan players were not being paid, but the league needed a New York presence. The Houston Oilers owner, Bud Adams, was paying the New York bills. David Sonny, as in money, Werblin. The biggest off-field business move for the AFL happened on March 28, 1963. Five-man syndicate led by David Sonny Werblin purchased Wismer's bankrupt New York Titans for $1 million. Werblin had a friendship with Sarnoff. Werblin also convinced AFL owners that football was entertainment, not just a game. 1963, Rozelle pitted CBS against NBC in a battle for a long-term TV deal, and this is where circumstances came into play. The NFL was in a battle with the AFL for players and control of football, and big money TV would give them cash to go after talented players coming out of college. Rozelle signed a big money deal with CBS and Paley in 1964. That infuriated Sarnoff at NBC. Sarnoff wanted revenge, and he got it. Sarnoff had worked with Lou Wasserman's MCA TV, where Werblin was employed. MCA was placing TV shows, Leave It to Beaver, on Sarnoff's network. Sarnoff and Werblin had a relationship. Werblin became the point guy between the AFL and NBC. Werblin knew TV and entertainment inside out. He was Johnny Carson's PR guy, Elizabeth Taylor's PR guy, and he knew that football was more than just gameplay. It was entertainment, TV programming. Something not an easy sell to football men in those days. It was just a game. Werblin got the deal done with Sarnoff, brought $7 million annually between 1965 and 1969. Sarnoff also advanced money to AFL teams so they could sign players out of college, which Sarnoff knew would enhance the AFL on NBC. With some of that money and revenues that Werblin and his fellow Jets owners suddenly got from larger crowds at the new Shea Stadium starting in 1964, in January 1965, Sonny Werblin signed Joe Namath to a 3-year, $427,000 contract, about $4.5 million today, the largest contract ever given to a player at that point. The AFL was not going away thanks to NBC and David Sarnoff. And there is Joe with Weave Eubank and Sonny Werblin. Joe Namath was going to be the face of the Jets and ultimately the face of the American Football League. The Werblin-Sarnoff connection changed football. Flushed with money, NFL and AFL owners were signing players to bigger contracts, and the players pitted the leagues against one another. Pete Gogolak goes from Buffalo to the New York Giants. The NFL and the Giants called, explained Gogolak, I signed with the Giants and made 3 times as much as I made with the Bills. I signed for $35,000, about $372,000 today. They gave me a 4-year no-cut contract. I went to the Giants and the team wasn't as good as the Bills. Then you know what happened. The AFL started calling NFL players. The war started, and basically a few months later, the 2 leagues merged. So maybe I started something. Not only started the soccer-style kick, but maybe I started the merger. The new AFL commissioner, Al Davis, went after NFL players. San Francisco 49ers quarterback John Brody, Los Angeles Rams quarterback Roman Gabriel, Chicago Bears tight end Mike Ditka, all got lucrative offers from AFL teams. The 2 leagues spent $7 million, more than $74 million today, for rookies for the 1966 season, just prior to the merger. The spending had to come to an end, according to the owners in both leagues. Looking for a solution. Tex Schramm, Still have all 5 of my fingers, even though I shook hands with Tex Schramm there on the left, Pete Rozelle in the middle, Lamar Hunt in the right. It was the Dallas Cowboys president, Tex Schramm, try it again, Tex Schramm, who made the initial overture to Lamar Hunt to combine the leagues. Schramm met with Hunt at Love Field under the Lone Ranger statue, although it was the Texas Rangers statue. And both men proceeded to a car in the parking lot and began to talk about their leagues and the health of the football industry in general in 1966. He was on his way from Kansas City to Houston, and we went out into a car and talked, said Schramm. I had called him and asked him to meet with me. He was in Kansas City. He was going to an AFL meeting in Houston, and he said he would arrange his travel so he could meet me in Dallas. It's all prearranged. Looking for a solution. The Schramm-Hunt talks weren't the first discussion between the two leagues. However, Schramm and Hunt came up with a comprehensive plan. Baltimore's Carroll Rosenblum had talked with Buffalo's Ralph Wilson earlier. 1961, the AFL commissioner Joe Foss wired the NFL and proposed a world playoff game between the 1961 AFL and NFL champion. The American Football League and the National Football League announced the merger plan on June 8, 1966, but the two entities could not become one without antitrust exemption from Congress. There is me in that picture from 1986, Pete Rozelle up front, me with the tie. 4th and 10, the AFL needs the long bomb. Pete Rozelle became the NFL commissioner in 1960. Sports commissioner is a hardened political lobbyist, and the NFL commissioner Rozelle was an old hand on Capitol Hill by the summer of 1966. There is Russell Long, the senator from Louisiana, and Lyndon Johnson, president of the United States. Neither the Louisiana Democrat Senator Russell Long, who is the Senate's majority whip and chairman of the Senate Financial Committee, nor Louisiana Congressman Hale Boggs, Cokie Roberts' father, were very excited about the planned football merger. Neither saw the merger benefiting New Orleans, as the city had neither an AFL nor an NFL team. Shea Stadium, close to Brooklyn. The NFL had a plan. They had it all figured out. Originally, there was a thought of moving some teams around to satisfy Louisiana interests. The Jets, Sonny Werblin, Joe Namath, they go to Los Angeles. It's fine. Werblin has his showbiz connections, and Namath wants to become an actor. Daniel Reeves would take his Los Angeles Rams franchise to San Diego, replacing the Chargers. Baron Hilton would then take his Chargers to New Orleans, where he had business, and they'd figure out what to do with Oakland eventually, either Seattle or Portland. But Manuel Sellers, hey, look, I gave you this thing in 1961. No teams move, especially the Jets. They're adjacent to my district. You know how many people from Brooklyn go to Shea Stadium? Take the train, drive there. So Rozelle's got to go back to his owners and say, we got to go to New Orleans, like me and my daughter did a few years ago. Rozelle and the NFL owners relented, worked out a deal with Hale Boggs that included placing a team in New Orleans. Congress approved the NFL-AFL merger by giving the two competitors an antitrust exemption, which was added as a rider to an anti-inflation tax bill on October 21st, 1966. Tell me what politician is going to vote for inflation? None. This was a letter that the owner of the Detroit Lions, William Clay Ford, sent to Congressman Gerald Ford. A sincere thank you for your able assistance in bringing about congressional approval of the NFL-AFL merger. The passage of this bill will now allow merger plans to go full speed ahead. Also important is the first championship game between the two leagues will now be played for real in January. So on behalf of our club, we want to say thank you for your wholehearted support. There is Hale Boggs. The NFL awarded its 16th franchise to New Orleans on November 1st, 1966, All Saints Day. Johnson signed the bill into law November 8th. That is the pen that was used by Lyndon Johnson to create the National Football League of today and the Super Bowl. The league pocketed about $8 million or $8 million expansion fee, $85 million today, from the New Orleans owner John Mecum, and that was split between the 15 teams. Additionally, the New York Jets ownership paid $10 million about $106 million today to the New York Giants ownership for invading the territory. Oakland Raiders owners handed over $8 million, $85 million today to the San Francisco 49ers. They invaded the Bay Area. The AFL also agreed to pay the NFL the $7.5 million expansion fee it received from Cincinnati in 1968, about $80 million today. The merger. Of the merger, Pete Rozelle said that at the time he was surprised that the AFL was interested, or that we were interested, because we were such bitter enemies. The war was going on. We were raiding players. Obviously, the terms and conditions turned out to be favorable, particularly to teams that had to take in competitors in New York and San Francisco. History shows it was a good move, costly one, but it gave the league greater strength. Without Hale Boggs and Russell Long, there would have been no NFL team in New Orleans. The Jerk. That's me. My friend Bruce Morton. We're interviewing Joe Namath. The first NFL AFL League Championship game played on January 15th, 1967. Before a one-third empty house, Los Angeles Coliseum, Green Bay defeated Kansas City 35-10. The AFL was dismissed by sports reporters, called the Mickey Mouse League by the Green Bay coach Vince Lombardi. Green Bay won its second straight NFL title, so the teams, NFL teams, were not beating Lombardi's teams either. The AFL's New York Jets, led by Joe Namath, upset the NFL's Baltimore Colts January 12, 1969 in the Super Bowl, in the most important game in NFL history. Even Rozelle said so. It gave the NFL new momentum. The NFL survived the loss, and they would prosper. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions, any comments? It is your turn to talk now. Unmute yourselves if you have anything to say. Nobody?
Hey, Evan, did you say at the beginning that there's a book?
Yeah, you look me up on Apple, you could find it.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't find it on Amazon.
Basically, that's the middle section of the book. There's a section after that, and there's the beginning section.
Yeah, how do I find it? I looked on Amazon.
Look up my name and look up iTunes. It's only an ebook now.
Okay, got it.
So yeah, I got all those stories. Going back to Bucko Kilroy back in the 1940s. Anybody else? You mean I took care of all of it? Nobody else? I guess I took care of everybody.
Yes, you did.
So hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you.
It's a story of TV. A story of some skullduggery, and a story of race relations. And
Yes.
believe it or not, that all ended up into creating the Super Bowl.
Yes, it did.
So and the NFL really doesn't talk about it. In fact, the American Football League boycott, there was a special about it, and there is something in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but it is not one of the quote-unquote highlights of the civil rights movement, and yet it should be. These guys did it all by themselves. They didn't depend on anybody else. They took the lead. They put their careers on the line, and they succeeded. And because of those guys, that's how the sausage was made for today's big game, the Super Bowl.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you. We'll see you in February.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.